reading about the 20s and 30s was very much, this was like in Hindi, it had not really, a certain kind of Hindi nationalism hadn't actually been, remained. It was not the only nationalism, of course. Hindi was a very varied space, as I showed. So yeah, but certainly that continuity was there. And then, so then I actually wanted, because I thought that Hindi was so exclusionary, I wanted to see, okay, what did it exclude?
Usually I start by asking all our invited scholars about a bit of a personal journey as to how one has come across some of those important ideas that one is very comfortable in talking about. And that is particularly in the background of the last year, the pandemic year, so to say, which is still continuing. Presumably, a pandemic year was an occasion for most of us, not only in academics, also otherwise, to be self-reflective and do a bit of soul searching of whatever we have been doing.
Me, I think I was coming back from Delhi about a year ago. So for me, the start of the pandemic was putting away my saman from Delhi and not taking it out now for 12 months, which is a very, very unusual, actually. I mean, for some reason I had, as many academics, I had spent actually my last few years traveling here and there and being invited, and I suppose, like many, I actually have found that although of course it would be really nice to have some gupshup, real interaction, and go for a drink, and that kind of
right,
the time before and after talks that is so enjoyable.
yes.
I have not missed spending so much time in airports or traveling long distances just for 1 hour talk. Seems like a crazy idea, which I hope we will not return to. So I mean, I hope that we will be able in some form to either continue this some kind of this Zoom conversations, which actually for my kind of topics where my real interlocutors are really spread all over the world. So we have a series called The Magazine and World Literature. Another series is on post-colonial print cultures. And basically we meet like every month, and half of the people are in the US, some are in India, some are here, some in Europe. And as we called it a dream team to start with, and truly it is. I think I would certainly encourage everybody to kind of find their dream team and just use the technology in a way I think that we did not quite use before. I mean, I think I've had a project for the last 5 years, and with a lot of really great events and speakers and so on. And most of the time, we tried to fiddle with the technology and record, and then it wouldn't really happen, and then we forgot. We just thought, okay, never mind. And now 5 years later, I say, oh, I wish we had recorded them. Of course, I mean, I think the web is going to be chock-a-block with too many talks very soon.
True.
And it's become actually very difficult. I mean, I've been, as you know, when you are developing work, you're using different venues, different practices, different platforms to hone your arguments. But now everything gets recorded, so I suppose that's the flip side. So you feel bad about. Well, actually, there's a version of this talk already somewhere there in the ether about what to do. Believe it, but actually I did a BA Hindi in Venice University. There was something called BA Hindi, and I had studied Italian literature really well. I mean, in high school, actually, Italian scholarship was interesting, a bit different from Anglo-American scholarship in that, particularly at the time, it was more influenced by historiography, actually the annals. So there was a lot on material culture, the social conditions of intellectuals, the kind of history, geography, and so on. And then semiotics, if you think of Eco not as a novelist, but as a writer of semiotics, there was a big school of semiotics in Italy. So there's a great high school set of literature manuals, which actually I think were used more at university, called The Material and the Imaginary. And I think, those kind of two poles of material life, material conditions, and then proper attention to the textual features and formal features was something that I came with to university. Then for 4 years we read mostly Nai Kahani stories, and I had up to my ears of Mohan Rakesh and Rajendra Yadav and Manu Bhandari and so on. I mean, I was lucky enough to be able to interact with Rajendra Yadav. I actually did my undergraduate dissertation on him, and Manu Bhandari, whom I actually like more as a writer.
Yes.
But anyway, to go to Hans and so on. But then, it felt like, okay, this is not quite as varied as I hoped. So the years after my BA, which I spent 2.5 years in Delhi, actually, I tried to get into JNU. I was teaching Italian at the Italian Cultural Institute, and was more spent kind of exploring other Hindi writing. So I discovered Renu, I discovered Nirala. And then as a kind of, when I was thinking about doctoral work, then this period, actually the biography of Nirala by Ramvilas Sharma was very influential, in giving really a sense of the times. So there, for the first time, I got a bit of the sense of, the material and the imaginary. And I started working with magazines, and then it started from there.
About the journey, the history of Hindi and Urdu public sphere, and the shifts that has happened in contemporary India. How do you see those?
So my first book, The Hindi Public Sphere, was really about, the creation of what I call the Hindi Sanskar, this sort of Shuddh Hindi Sanskar, and which I think we all have experience of through schools, and which, unfortunately put so many bright kids off Hindi for life because they encounter this very, stern, very, I mean, of course, some must feel inspired, but I think a lot are put off from the world of Hindi as one where, you sit ramrod and there's no fun, basically. And it was interesting.
Was that some version of Sarkari Hindi, like official?
I think it's more like, the Hindi you get in textbooks, no? If you think of what are the kinds of poems that you're likely to encounter in your Hindi book, no? They're probably about some, Acha Bacha and, the Jhanda and the Tiranga Pyara kind of thing, no? And of course I was doing that in the 90s. So, that was a time when I think the discourse of Hindutva was, of course, becoming more public. And for me, was like I was reading about the 20s and 30s was very much, it was like in Hindi, it had not really, a certain kind of Hindi nationalism hadn't actually been, remained. It was not the only nationalism, of course. Hindi was a very varied space, as I showed. So but certainly that continuity was there. And then, so then I actually wanted, because I thought that Hindi was so exclusionary, I wanted to see, okay, what did it exclude? And I wanted to become multilingual myself. So I started actually learning Farsi, and Urdu came in the middle. And I did the work on 19th century publishing, which was really interesting because it showed that at the same time that, the Hindi Andolan, the Hindi movement was gaining ground, and all that kind of crystallization of symbols of, the cow, Hindi, Nagari, history was going on. Actually, at the very, very same time, in the world of commercial publishing, of theater, the existing heterogeneity. I mean, I call it multilingualism. Some people don't like the term, but heterogeneity of idioms, of aesthetics. All the way from Urdu to Urdu ghazals, masnavis, baramasa, but also Kajri and Tumri and so on, which everybody understood and appreciated. You can see it in the kind of akaras of poets. Actually, it was not just one story. There was one story going in one direction and one story going in the other direction. And I still see it. In fact, interestingly, I still sort of really think of the impact of colonialism and the development of these ideas of language, of literature, of community, which are so polarizing and polarized, as existing in a tension, and I see it as a gap with tastes. So I think tastes will save us from that kind of very stern and very very sort of nationalism. And you can see still in the longing for Urdu that is still there. I mean, I think the basis, the social basis, the educational basis for Urdu have been much eroded, but the taste for Urdu is still there.
And historically, if we see, Hindi public sphere has been much vibrant and very much diversified. That gave kind of idea of heterogeneous nationalism. But nowadays, what we see in contemporary times, that there is a decline of Hindi public sphere on the one hand, and also there is a rise and consolidation of Hindi nationalism.
So I think the public sphere included Hindi nationalism from the start. I mean, if you look at the magazines of, Saraswati, but also Madhuri and so on, I think you can't say that, the public sphere is, in a sense, is the space and the discourse, and Hindi nationalism was very much part of it from the start. But it is true that there were also, many different voices, and to be honest, I don't think that those voices are necessary. I think in literature, I don't think that those voices are not there now. I think, probably, I think we should probably still, I'm starting to go back to the, to the 1950s, 60s, 70s now. And I think what you find there is that it's almost like, again, it's not just, if you look at the magazines of the 50s and 60s, there's a lot of talk of course, there are the progressives, but then there's a lot of talk of the kind of the ordinary, Samanya Janta, Sarvajan, and so on. And the struggles of, I was looking at magazines like Kahani, Sarika, and this one, who was interested in all kinds of things. So now that was a time, of course, of, so it's a very, I find it a kind of lower middle class imagination. Which of course is very different from the consumer imagination of now. So I'm not, I think it's not just a question of politically left and right. I think it's also, what is the imagination of the self, of the we, and what are its horizons?
So how do you see the presence and contribution of cartoons in Hindi public sphere as well as in vernacular public sphere?
Actually, I have a brilliant student who's just finished her PhD yesterday. Really interesting arguments are, that, so she thinks that, when we think about humor, we tend to think about satire, which has a very, and then we tend to think, okay, what is the target of satire? And what is, with a very clear ideological position. But actually, she says a lot of humor, certainly in Avad Punch, seems to be kind of directed everything itself and other, like everything. So she uses parody as a lens. She thinks actually, if we think of parody, then it's parody of a lot of parody of the self, of the very self. Western educated Urdu or Hindi writer or intellectual, who is the person writing or who is the person cartooning. So it's which means that it makes, we should be a bit more, we should be probably careful in thinking of clear divisions or polarizations. No, I mean, satire and humor, of course, work by caricaturing, polarizing, but then actually, who is the satire directed to, and who is it from? I mean, is the there's a lot of satire of the anglicized Babu or the Muhazzab Bivi, the civilized Bivi, but those are also the people you are becoming and you want to become. I think there's more, in fact, of course, but as we know, there's always more policing of the educated Bivi than of the educated men.